Alright, and we're live. Until that dies. As we all do. Just have that going so I can see that. No notes, fuck it, let's go. Alright, welcome, thanks for having me.
Thank you very much for having me. It's
Here
really
we are.
an exciting opportunity, I think, to talk about things in a way that I wouldn't normally do it, but I would die for the opportunity to do, so it's great for me.
Right. Bloody wonderful. So, yeah, who are you? Maybe we should skip that.
No, I'm happy to do it.
What?
I am Tristan Burt. I'm your cousin. I suppose the reason that we're getting together today is because we spoke a few weeks ago, and I could hear that you were going through something very similar to something that I'd been through. A moment, I suppose, of kind of at once like taking one's hands off the wheels and also really putting your hands on the wheels at the same time. Is this moment where you're going to feel like you're taking control of your life by sort of letting your life unfold. So when I heard you going through that experience, I felt like that was a rare event and that we should get together to talk and to,
Totally.
share with one another, and for me to kind of share that experience that I had.
That phone call in the hallway was like one of those life moments that are like life moments, you know?
Yeah.
It's amazing that I was like, oh, maybe I'll just sort of give Tristan a ring.
Yeah.
And it was also really weird to have sort of heard your story from the periphery through the family.
Yes.
And not through you.
Yeah.
Different worlds.
Yeah.
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 Even in the family, you know, like people who actually know you.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, one thing that really struck me going through that experience, and I've said it to people since then, and I think people find it quite confronting, but a concrete lesson that I learned going through that experience was that you can't trust anyone. You know what I mean? You can't trust anyone. Like, you've got to stand on your own feet, because even the people closest to you, when push comes to shove, don't necessarily view the world the way you do. They don't necessarily trust you. So you self-report what you say is happening, but that'll get filtered back through their own worldview, and then that becomes their take on you, and that's not necessarily a useful take on you. It's not necessarily a truthful take on you, but because of a certain proximity, people will assume, because it's coming from this person or that person, that it's true. And also that person, because of their proximity to you, will feel like strongly like they can push then that view that they have back upon you. And so
the social world's kind of alive or something. It kicks back, you know. Or...
Yeah. Well, we're born kind of trusting,
Sure.
Say parents are a good example. You trust that they have your back. That there is no ulterior motive. That a parent cares for their child and loves them unconditionally. And
I don't know about unconditionally, but like, I don't know. I feel like my folks have my back, and that's
and would never be giving you advice that was harmful to you.
Yeah, process of growing up, you know.
And might not even be, in a sense, kind of deliberately harmful to you. Like, in the sense that people's lives and their own agendas are not completely separate from your own. And what you do affects them, and they have a vested interest sometimes in you doing particular things.
Sure, be safe, kid, you know? Like,
be a safe kid, but also don't throw any particular challenges my way about my life. Don't put me in awkward positions, right? This is something I think... So yeah, the story that you're getting is not necessarily the story as I would tell it.
Fascinating. Well, keen to get from the horse's mouth. Huh?
Yeah, well...
Definitely with the art stuff, that was like a self-choice, you know? It's like...
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, like... This is stupid and doesn't make sense to anybody. And so it's sort of... even to myself, it's stupid and doesn't make sense. But
Yeah. Yeah.
like you do it, you're holy shit, I'm alive. You know, it's like I wanna
Yeah.
like,
Well, other people I think are always going to have...
gain the whole world. You know, you seen that painting where the guy's like reaching out? There's like the vault of heaven or whatever, the dome, and he's like sticking his head out through the heavenly sphere.
No, I haven't. No.
It's a great one. It's like you're finally out of the structure. You know, you're finally out of your own ideology.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've been thinking a bit about this idea that, like, truth is subjective, because you say, I'll get it from the horse's mouth. Does that mean I'm giving you some, like, objective version of what happened to me or the experiences that I went through? Or is it that, you know, truth is necessarily subjective, but if that statement is true in some sort of objective way, then I think what it's really saying is that truth depends on you as a subject, right? That you can either see the truth or not see the truth.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to depend on you
Mm-hmm.
as a subject, right? There's no way around it. It's a matter for you. So I'm going to tell you my story, my subjective truth of what happened to me. But I mean it in the sense that I firmly believe that is true.
Mm.
You know, because that's, I think, what was at the root of the journey that I went on.
And I think to the extent that you're aligned, it is.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that you feel it strongly, automatically, right? Like, I think you said that maybe one of the things to talk about in this would be, you know, how you make the impossible possible. And when you said that to me, I mean, my immediate response was to think, well, the minute you're walking that path, like, you know that you're doing it, right? Like, you know that, in a sense, all of those things that people would say are impossible obstacles,
Totally.
they're not for you.
You have a good day, you're on fire. You know, like you.
Yeah. And you're not subject to doubt in the same way as before. You know, it's just something
it's like,
that,
this
know,
is all of my being, and like, I've done the best I could, and like, great. You know, it's like, go me.
yes.
We'll see what the hell happens. You know, it's like,
Yeah. This is
this is the sort of art
this
stuff,
is
you
the
know?
truth. This is the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And so therefore, like, nothing is gonna, as it were, stand in its way. Like, so that's a feeling, I think, that comes.
Totally. Yeah, and if it's like if you're in sync with the muses, or you're like sort of dancing well, it's like, how could it not work out? Like, even if it doesn't work out, works out, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. What's the Buddhist thing? Victory and defeat are the same. There's something to that. And I think, like, you get this feeling all of a sudden that, you know, victory and defeat are the same. Like, you totally muck it up. It's actually not different to your
Sure,
complete
it's like
success.
you have a breakup, you know, or something. It's like,
Yeah.
and you come out of that.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know?
Yep.
You come out of the defeat more than you were. You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. And then it's giving you a whole other paradigm. Like, one paradigm, obviously, you're really trying to avoid all those negative things.
Like,
Another
there are a lot
paradigm, well, it's like they're the same as the positive things, so you are embracing them.
there are a whole bunch of things you're doing that led up to the defeat, you know?
Yes.
And like, there's that, like, grace is the fall, and grace is the rise after the fall. Like,
Right.
oh yeah, I love that grace is the fall?
Yeah, it's both of them, yeah.
Oh.
Absolutely. And you wouldn't want one without the other, and you're not trying to avoid, therefore, one or the other. Like, you want to go through it all.
Sure.
And you'll be happy.
I'm always tempted to seek them out, you know, let's go bash my head into my mistakes, sort of thing, you know? 'Cause then...
Yeah, well, I think it's like that you have the confidence when you are walking on that in that way, you know. You don't feel that you're going to bang your head into a wall. You just think, yeah, this is the way. And like,
if the fall comes, so it comes, you know.
Yeah, and I think that is probably the answer
Hopefully
to that
I've got
question.
the courage and the wisdom and the, you know, sort of... I don't know.
I think it's probably the answer to that question then, of making the impossible possible. Is like, well, you just don't have a concern about that being impossible.
Mm.
You know, you're just gonna do it.
Yeah.
And it's not.
And you sort of do. Like, it's like you write a poem and you're like, where'd that come from? You're like,
Yes.
wow.
Yeah.
You know, like that didn't exist and now it exists. So you
Yes.
do some artwork and you're like, I don't know. It's just, yeah.
And I think it also happens very quickly when you're on that path. That you feel as though you're moving from a state of like not being sure to very quickly getting concrete evidence back that those sort of initial steps you were taking are taking you somewhere.
Yeah, it feels like crazy as well. It's
very quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's not a matter of waiting a decade to find out that like
Totes.
you took the right step.
No, it's like that was the right step, and like I really love it. Like bringing down doing work in the day to day. It's like how I live my day is how I live my life.
Yes.
You know, it's like there's not going to be some magic other elsewhere where I do things and get the things I want to be done. It's like,
yeah,
if I want to make paintings, I need to, in a day, make art, you know?
Do it today.
Yeah. And so I've kind of like woven that into the schedule. Like I sort of wake up and try and do a bit of story writing, bit of art, bit of sculpture. I'm still trying to figure out how to do sculpture because I can't weld on anything in the flat. And then like music at the end of the day, sort of thing. Bit of reading, you know. It's like, damn, if it's in the day, do it every day.
Every day.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it feels to you like this is what you need to be doing.
Totes, yeah.
This is the way for you to go.
Yeah. But anyway, we're getting sidetracked with me. So, what led you to where you are? How did you take this unusual academic route? You believe some interesting, varied, fascinating to me things that do not seem to be all that enjoyed by the establishment. So, how did you come to that?
Well, I suppose like I did usual things: school, uni, undergrad. Did a bit of philosophy.
It's sort of woven into the legal stuff a bit. You have to.
That's right. Yeah. You have to. So you can't just do a law degree, which is good. So I started with that, and then wandered far away from that. I did do like honors in philosophy eventually, with a focus on Nietzsche, and then wandered really far away from it all, and went and became a corporate lawyer, like so many people do, go through law school, and I realized basically that was not the way for me. It was not at all satisfying. And I remember the moment that it happened was just, I felt like I heard this really clear voice, my own voice in my head, just saying, get up and go. So I stood up from my desk at my office.
Oh, damn.
And I left the office with a view to never going back.
Bloody hell, Saul on the road.
Yeah, it had that kind of moment of, I suppose, clarity. Like, yeah, that I felt.
Wow.
I felt that I was listening to myself, like, for really the first time in a very sincere way. Like, that this was something that I wanted to do. I wanted to get up and leave, and therefore I should do it. And so that began, I suppose, a commitment that was basically, to put it in simple terms, a commitment to doing what I considered to be the right thing to do. And then that returned to me eventually. Well, like I say, immediately I felt that I was doing the right thing, notwithstanding people saying to me, okay, well, this is a controversial move,
Who the hell are
dangerous
you?
move.
What are you doing with your life?
What are you going to do with your life?
What am I going to do with my life?
What am I going to do with my life? And the only answer I could give at that stage was that I just didn't know.
Yeah.
I didn't know. And that, I think, was upsetting for people.
Good Socratic answer, not very satisfying, yeah.
Yeah, a bit not very satisfying, a bit upsetting.
Because who are you? You're also the shining story, you know? Like,
Yeah.
I don't know, the great university and the great, sort of, you're the...
Yeah, I mean, I'd done well at uni and I got a good job and...
It's like, here you are, you're this person in society and we kind of like that and you've done something and like...
Yeah.
There you are.
And then
you're
you're
going to give it all away?
and walk away on the grounds that you don't know what you're going to do. So, you don't know how you're going to pay for everything.
Sure.
So all those kind of basic concerns, obviously, were concerning everyone. But again, like I say, it didn't take very long before that, taking that step, returned me to start thinking again about some of the things I've been thinking about a long, long time ago and had put on the back burner, and specifically started thinking about the connection between different kind of books that had interested me over a long time. And it was actually reading Bertrand Russell's History of Western Philosophy that I sort of twigged to the fact that a number of texts which I had not thought as being somehow fundamentally related to one another really were. So in particular, a text like the Bible, which I thought of as being completely different and separate from philosophical texts, was written at least in a very similar underlying language, that of Greek. So then that really got me fascinated in the Greek language. And very quickly I became interested in the Greek language. I started to feel that this was a more natural language to think in and to use, to express myself with.
So you realised that these texts were sort of related, and then the jump to Greek, you sort of...
Well, the relation was Greek.
Okay.
So that what these texts that I had thought were very separate, belonged to very distinct camps. A religious text, a philosophical text, that both of which had like drawn my interest and attracted me, even though I thought them completely separate, were actually written in the same underlying language. So then I started to think, well, what is this underlying language? Like, perhaps it has something to do with that. And I'm being attracted really to that underlying language. So the moment I stood up from my desk, I walked away. I know, I'd probably heard of Greek a little bit before.
You haven't got a clue where you're going.
I remember I had a book by Heidegger called Pathmarks, and it had a lot of Greek in it. So I'd seen Greek before, but that was about as much as I could say. That I'd seen it, and that I knew it had some kind of connection to philosophy, because Heidegger was quoting these passages and translating them. So it wasn't as though I had completely no knowledge of Greek, and obviously you knew that the philosophers were Greek in some sense, the ancient ones. But when I stood up and walked away from my desk, there was no because this is I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to go and I'm going to
Here's the great story I'm going to tell people for,
Exactly. Yeah. I'm going to go and I'm going to learn Greek. That's what I'm going to do. Or I'm going to go and work in Greek. That wasn't there at all. But very quickly, from that moment of saying, okay, well, I want to commit to what I think is the right thing to do.
Get back to the good, follow the good wherever it leads,
Just exactly follow it. Whatever's drawing my attention, whatever it is that I feel I should commit to, I'll just commit to it. And then very quickly, okay, here's this insight, which you had not thought of before, that there's this connection. So... Sorry,
2 quick things. We should switch seats, I reckon, so you can see out into the vista.
Yeah.
And also, you've probably got to talk a little bit more into the microphones.
Okay. I can talk more loudly as well.
Okay, so you've walked away from your desk.
Walked away from my desk.
You've got a book or two.
I've picked up a few books. I've started, returning back to things that I knew had interested me in the past a little bit. Then I've sort of suddenly realized, okay, well, there's some unifying thing here that I've not been paying attention to.
Mm-hmm.
So then the minute I got interested in Greek, I started looking at the language. And like I say, it felt really natural. It didn't feel like, oh my god, this is all impossible. Whereas maybe it connects with how do you make the impossible possible question? Because say I remember looking at those Greek quotations in Pathmarks and being like, well, that's clearly impossible. You know what I mean? This is
What do you mean?
Whatever that is, it's just a bunch of random symbols. You know what I mean? Heidegger tells me it means that, fine. You know what I mean? Like, who am I to question that? Like, that's just that's something that has no relation to me in terms of what I could possibly do.
Interesting that Heidegger was into Greek, because like phenomenology is so true.
Right, yeah.
I think so much of his philosophy.
I mean, they're fascinating. I think, you know, all the phenomenologists ultimately were fascinated with Greek.
They're on the money in other areas of philosophy, so it's interesting that there's a bit of overlap with also a love of Greek.
Well, you realise basically it's not just them, of course. Like, it's anyone who was interested in philosophy ultimately was interested in Greek. Foucault, right? I mean, hugely interested in Greek. You know,
not too much of a fan of him, to be honest.
Well, he spent some of his last years, you know, working on translations of Greek texts.
Wow.
Yeah, Nietzsche obviously fascinated with Greek. I mean, you realise then once you start getting into it, you know, I'm not the first person who's been like, Greek is an important thing here.
Okay.
So, again, but it's crazy, isn't it? Because you're not, again, the moment we stand up and walk away from the desk, you're not remotely thinking about those things. But very quickly, you get put on this path to an interest in something which connects you with this huge culture.
I love the language that you get put on this path, not like you chose this path.
Yeah, well, because, I mean, obviously you can't self-direct it other than say...
Totally. Yeah, it's like the world is so much bigger than my rational thinking, logical, being able to say things in words. That's me, you know? It's like I don't want to rest my directionality on like like me.
Yeah.
Like my knowing.
Yeah.
That's a fucking stupid place to rest directionality on, you know?
And it's fascinating because I think that, like, and I think this connects to your experience a little bit that we were talking about. The moment that you kind of say, okay, well, I'm just going to trust in this broader thing, that freaks a lot of people out. As though the only way to go through life is controlling it in that narrow perspective. Like the really narrow...
But they all should, you know? Like...
Well, and I think that you make a really good point. That you think about you in this huge thing. Okay, well, like, if you're going to try and control it here, they're going to be bloody hard.
Yeah.
Because it goes on a long way on either side of you.
Yeah.
And there are an infinite number of forces that you could have no idea about.
Yeah.
Okay, so best laid plans kind of thing.
Better to just be a pen, you know?
Yeah.
Rather than trying to be the hand.
Yeah, and I think that in that sense, there's like one thing you can do that aligns you, and that is to really make that commitment to align, to say, okay, well, I am going to...
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm going to show up at the page, you know?
Exactly.
I'm going to show up to the world kind of thing, you know?
Yeah, I'm at least going to say, like, that I don't know.
Yeah.
And that I'm open to knowing. And...
Oh, it's wonderful, they don't know. It's like a warm bath, you know?
Yeah.
Whereas I know is a struggle.
Yeah.
Because you don't.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're obviously not starting from knowing.
Sure.
So you've got to make that first moment of saying, well, okay, I'm like going to acknowledge that. And so me trying to control it from this position of ignorance, where's it going to go? It's going to be a freaking nightmare.
Yeah.
Which, well, it was for me, a complete nightmare.
Yeah, and all of us. And
yeah, yeah. Because there's little old you, completely ignorant, trying to run the show, trying to run even just your own little show in amongst, like, this huge environment that surrounds you. So,
damn.
And then so quickly, it shows you, okay?
Okay, you're there, you've got Heidegger,
you're saying...
You see the flash of Greek, you're like, what is this?
Yeah, and you're like, oh, yeah, well, like, why am I even interested in this? Then you go and you start looking at the texts, and you start looking at the language, and you start thinking about the meanings of the words, and then it just is a feeling that, okay, well, now using a language that is more natural to me. I'm using a language that allows me to think more clearly. And then I thought, okay, maybe I go and I do a PhD, okay? Maybe I go and I work on this for a while.
There's something here.
Something here. And the funny thing is I wrote pitches to various, potential supervisors. And, nothing affirmative back from anyone.
Damn.
And then I'd reached a point where I was like, well...
Surely there's somebody wants to study classics,
Yeah, so yeah, exactly.
Please come.
Yeah, exactly. We don't have, not exactly people beating down the door.
There's interest.
Yeah. Of course there are people, but, yeah, so I put together this, one of the 20 pitches I did or something was to a professor of philosophy at Sydney University, and he was away doing something. So there was no response from him for months and months. Mm. And it was a submission a outline for something that was basically skeptical, essentially. So it was taking this position of maybe knowledge itself is some sort of problem. We should be trying to think in different ways, and maybe that's what Plato somewhere was driving at.
Interesting. Kind of propositional knowledge? I have other thing.
Yeah.
I'll collect facts together.
I think what I was really trying to do was trying to say, if we could just recognize that we've all got opinions or something, that would somehow, liberate us from the, terror of knowledge. So it was, pretty straight, in a way, skeptical position that there's some sort of benefit to rejecting knowledge as just outright. And so...
Controversial take?
Yeah. I don't know. I think it aligned quite well with some of his own thinking, or at least he could see that there was something there that maybe could be worked on. Mm. So, at a point where I'd gone, okay, fine, the PhD thing's not happening, no one's interested. Then out of the blue, I got this email from him. Oh, sorry, I've been away for 4 months or something. Just saw your email, happy to come and have a chat. Happy for you to come and have a chat if you want. So then they kind of got the PhD ball rolling.
Interesting. 20 emails to nothing to...
Yeah.
One random one out of left field.
Exactly. And then I thought, okay, well, so we go and we chat, and eventually, I apply for funding to do it. That's sort of taking ages. Is that going to come through? And anyway, we just eventually, the funding does come through. We get going with it. Whilst I was waiting to start the PhD, I started kind of looking at the translations of the Republic, which I thought I was going to use in this PhD somehow. It was going to be about Plato. Specifically, it was going to be about the Republic because of some passage I'd read in there, which I was saying basically points at this notion of skepticism being important. So I go and I start looking at the translations, and the more I look at the translations, the more I start feeling this doesn't feel to me like it makes much sense. There are definitely passages I'm reading here in the translations where I feel like it's just either it's bordering on nonsense, you know what I mean? Things are so contradictory. And I'd already been thinking a bit about the underlying language, obviously, and kind of trying to think for myself about what I imagined the usage of these words was supposed to be pointing towards. And I just had this feeling that, okay, we've got these translations, and obviously they're not going to be perfect. But more than that, I had this feeling that they were somehow deeply wrong. Not just, that should be in, not on, or that should be, she, not he. But more this is arguably, in my mind, not even a dialogue. You know what I mean? This is a totally different kind of text. maybe there even aren't these kind of characters. You know, maybe these are names. Maybe these are terms of address. Maybe this is a form of address from a author to a reader, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, nothing, obviously I'm not reading anything that's supporting that kind of view. But I'm just feeling it, like that there's something going on. And one day I went to a supervisor and I said, look, you know, I have this thought that, like, this text doesn't say kind of what we say it says. And he said, well, that's frankly pretty ridiculous. And I was like, well, I feel it. Like, I feel that's true, and I have this sense. And he said, all right, well, you go away. You tell me what you say this passage of the text says. And we'll work it through together, okay? This is before I'd really formally studied the Greek language through a university where, you know, you get the rules of inflection, etc., etc.
The drum.
Yeah, so I took it back to him, and just with my kind of having a crack based on my understanding of Greek and what I thought.
So
I was like,
wonderful to come at that, not going through
the formal
system.
system.
Yeah.
And so he said to me, well, you know, we sort of worked through it, and he was like, look, basically this is nonsense, right? Like, what you're saying is nonsense because it just doesn't match up at all against, you know, traditional, you know, like, basically you don't understand inflection, you don't understand these basic rules of Greek grammar, and so you'll have to go and do a course on Greek. You know, this is basically absurd. Okay, fine. I said, okay, well, I'll, you know, do the formal Greek studies.
I'll check this report.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're all good.
So I said, fine, I'll do the formal Greek studies, and
Okie dokie, give me your tools. Give me
your tools, and I'll do it. But meanwhile, I had this thought that, like, I wonder why we think that this is what the text says. So, like, how do we get it? Like, which was a thought that, like, of course it's super obvious, but, like, I just had not really had at that time. Like, you had the Republic, okay, it was on the shelves, and you just pick it up, and there it is, right? Like, you know, however we got it, obviously we got it, right? So, okay, but then obviously I'm thinking, well, does it feel right? I have this feeling about it. So how did we get it? Like, and then this is what I mean about it. It doesn't take very long. Okay, I go to the first, basically the most highly regarded manuscript, the oldest manuscript we have of the text. And you can get it online through the library in Paris. And I start looking at it, and okay, first page, first folio, first column, you start reading through, and I notice there are these colons, right? Colons in the text. And I look at the colons, I think I wonder what these colons are about. Why are there colons in the text? So I go and look it up. Okay, these are regarded as the change of speaker marks. So these are the marks that show you where one speaker picks up the dialogue, another one drops it off. You're moving from Socrates to Glaucon to wherever it might be. So I start looking at these colons, and I'm like, oh yeah, okay. And then I start deciphering the manuscript, and then I realize, well, that first colon on the first page of the most highly regarded manuscript of Plato doesn't occur where we would think it occurred. So you've got the very first column, very first page, very first change of speaker mark in the most highly regarded manuscript. It's not where you think it is. It's so a different person is speaking, or a different person is basically you have to be
continuous through one person.
Exactly. So continuous to one person, where in an edition today or a translation today, there would have been two people speaking. Okay, then I look at the next change of speaker. Okay, that's roughly where we'd think it'd be. Then the next change of speaker is not where we think it'd be again, right? Then another one's not where we think it's being. Okay, so
Damn.
what's going on? We've got a whole bunch of different people talking in this text, apparently. We've got one person speaking the lines of another person, then we've got another person speaking the lines of another person, then we've got another person speaking the lines of another person. On the first page, the first column, and I took it to my supervisor and I was like, check this out. You know what I mean? Like, what's going on, right? Like, I feel like this version that we have today is not speaking to me as though it's like what we think Plato said. Then I go and look at the manuscript tradition, the most highly regarded one. Well, it doesn't look like whoever wrote that manuscript thought that what we would say today, Plato said, was what Plato was saying. Okay, so let's look at the other manuscripts. Oh my god, like, virtually every manuscript offers a completely different ordering of speakers, right? Like, some absolutely amazing, like, just middle of a word that we would just regard as a single word, there's a speaker change. Because you can split Greek in all kinds of different ways. So whoever's written that manuscript has split that word actually into two words, and half of that word belongs to one speaker, and the other half of the word belongs to another speaker. Obviously the sense then, therefore, is very different. So I started tracing through the manuscript tradition and realizing that, okay, if we've got 50 manuscripts of this text, we're going to actually find 50 different orderings of speakers, 50 different versions of this text. So then one starts to wonder, okay, how do we get from these 50 different versions to the version that we have today, that we say is what Plato says?
What are the 50 different versions, sir?
All the different manuscripts. And those manuscripts come from, well, the provenance of them is largely unknown, but they come from...
Oh, so we've got all these different versions of the Republic.
Yeah.
With different
That's right.
speaker marks in different places.
Exactly, with apparently different orders of speakers, different characters. Sometimes I have character lists in the manuscripts that don't refer to characters that we think are in that.
Wow.
So this is all according with my suspicion that, like,
That's fascinating.
yeah, that maybe this isn't a dialogue, or there's maybe some people have not regarded some of these people as characters, but just like reference terms of address of a person. So it's a much more complicated story than this story that we have this text. And I start to look at it, and then I start really tracing the history of how we get the current version, which you can basically trace back to Florence, right? And of course the fascinating thing about this whole story is that at the time that this version emerges, the version we would say today is the Republic, the people who create that version aren't working off 50 manuscripts. They're working off maybe one or two manuscripts that they have before them. And they're working in an environment where they've got very little to go on. And in fact, the main guy behind all this, Marsilio Ficino is his name, there's very little known about how he learned the Greek language. So this guy that we think...
So it's all built off like one of the 50 versions. And like the characters.
Well, really, it's not even not even one of the 50 versions. The first time that you find the ordering of speakers that we have today is in a Latin translation of one of those 50 versions. The particular version that it works off doesn't have any speaker changes marked at that section of the text. In fact, it doesn't have speaker changes till 20 or 30 folios later. So they've either been erased or there was just no speaker changes in that version of the text. But the Latin translation that's written in the margins around that Greek one records the first instance of a speaker change occurring where we think it does today. Or where if you picked up a book today, it would kind of indicate the speaker changes here. So...
And are they definitely speaker changes? Like...
Well, people have sort of espoused various theories about what a colon might do in different types of texts, but
it's in the middle of a word.
Well, but the thing is, middle of a word according to whom? Because, like I say, the thing about Greek is that this is to jump ahead a bit with the thesis, but the thing about Greek is that it's not, in its classical form, it's not broken into words. It's a continuous script of letters, right? that just line up endlessly, looking like sort of a computer code. Just and so you've got to come in over the top of that and start splitting
Choose
it.
where the words are.
You've got to choose the words.
Bloody hell.
So you've got to split that text of just huge continuous text into all of these different words.
Do they kind of like fall out of it sometimes?
Do words fall out of it?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, really, if you go back to the oldest bits of papyri we have, you'll never find a bit of papyri that is consistent with a Greek edition of the text today. So the text recorded in the earliest versions won't be consistent with even the Greek text. It won't actually even have the same letters. You know, they will have changed over time.
Okay.
You know, they might have largely the same letters, but you won't find 100% correspondence. So letters change, words
That's
fall
sort of like
out.
words change, you know, letters change.
Yeah, I mean, or they just go missing. They just disappeared, or someone wrote different letters at that point in the text. So, of course, it becomes this massively fascinating story then.
Amazing to think of a language that's like without words.
Yeah, that's right. That it's... Well, you see that, like, and this is where I ultimately ended up going with it, because to tell the next bit of the story very quickly, I wrote a journal article, I sent it off to the main guy who works in this field, the guy who
Okay, you're back there, you've got you're like, this is not all adding up.
This is not all adding up. So I write a piece basically saying this doesn't all add up, does it? Like, and I send it off to, before I send it to a journal or anything, I send it off to this guy who I know is like closest to it.
Is this your supervisor?
No, this is a
different
guy
character
in the Netherlands who's worked closely with the last guy who prepared an Oxford edition of the text.
And we're back again. That one's still going. Yep.
Alright,
so you've got your.
I've got this article that I've written where I feel like, okay, I'm really onto something. I think this is what I said to my supervisor. I really feel like I've got the bull by the horns now. Like I feel like I can, you know, achieve what I want to achieve here. So this is my naivety. I send this article off to this guy, and he basically comes back and he says, I completely reject everything you say. Says basically the implication of what you're saying here is unthinkable. That was his literal word, unthinkable, which really stuck with me, obviously.
It's hilarious.
Yeah, because obviously the implication is therefore that we have been teaching a version of this text that's really unsupported by philological evidence, which you would want to rely on to ground a claim that this was Plato.
Can't like feel the scope of the tragedy or something.
Yeah.
Just like, no.
Yeah, exactly. If that's right, then all of these people, you know, have either been a little bit careless or haven't done the work, or, and I think, you know, you don't have to jump to some like savage conclusions about them, but certainly those more savage conclusions are left open by this kind of approach, which just says like, if we're really thorough about the work we do, it throws up this question. Now we've been telling students,
I mean, you can start with incompetence before you can work down to
yeah, or just, you know, if you think about the like logistics, okay, these manuscripts are spread all over Europe. People don't really have access to them.
Some poor guy in Florence sort of doing his best with what he's got.
Doing his best with what he's got. He's under a lot of pressures, different reasons.
He taught himself Greek.
Taught himself Greek. Somehow some mysterious way he came to know Greek. So therefore, okay, like, you know, everyone's doing the best they can. Now, I had a good opportunity, and I think there was a particular time when things were starting to get digitized, so I could do a lot of work even from Australia, where I could actually see a lot of manuscripts, and I could get digital copies and just write off to people. So I kind of had a unique opportunity here.
You've got this modern like rigging together.
Exactly, because I'm coming in at it fresh, and I, you know, there's been work done to identify all the manuscripts, and or as many as we know of. I can piggyback off that, contact the libraries, get digital copies sent, pretty quickly
Wow,
make these
great.
assessments in a way that people historically couldn't, right? Like you had to go to the place.
Yeah.
A lot of the manuscript
Find some
catalogs wouldn't
library
even be.
somewhere and
There wouldn't even be a record of
won't
it.
let you see them.
Exactly. They were held by princes and
Yeah.
people like this, and it was very hard to get access. Okay, so this is, so you can sort of explain it, like not even through incompetence, but just through difficulty, right? So, but nonetheless, the implication becomes, okay, well, maybe we haven't been as careful about this text as we ought to have been. And of course, then we've been telling people Plato said things that maybe there's no evidence for Plato having said, right? And I mean, potentially we've retrofitted our grammar, what we call our knowledge of Greek grammar, to suit a particular interpretation, which then makes it impossible to unstick that interpretation because your grammatical rules are now forcing you, or at least giving you the opportunities to make those translations of the text, right? So, it points at a whole bunch of problems, and that are very hard to unpick.
Yeah.
Right? What are you going to do then? Are you going to unpick your grammar? Are you going to... And basically, so the editorial attitude to change the speaker marks...
It's like, how do you fix your glasses without your glasses kind of thing,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And the editorial attitude to change the speaker marks, it turns out, historically has basically just been to dismiss them. So to just say, like, whatever the case, they're basically not a reliable guide to the actual ordering of speakers in a text. Now, that's a very sort of offhand, dismissive attitude to change of speaker marks. But the point that I'm making about it is, well, okay, be that as it may, like, if you want to say change of speaker punctuation is not a reliable guide to the ordering of speakers in a text, why are we picking this one bit of change of speaker punctuation in a Latin translation of a Greek manuscript and saying, yeah, here it is, like this one, out of, we've got 50 different ones that are much older,
This
closer in time to the text. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
And then we get to this one Latin one, we jump over a language, and then we go, there you go, oh, I found it. So this seems to...
If you had to choose...
Exactly, if you had to choose, and if we're going to be consistent about this practice of being dismissive of change of speaker punctuation, then we really need to look hard at why it is we've jumped this way. And you can connect that then to a very interesting history of scholarship in Europe generally, because it ends up sort of running back through from Ficino, who was the guy who wrote this Latin translation, through Erasmus, who is a hugely influential figure in humanism. He's often called the Prince of the Humanists, who basically...
Even I vaguely know that name.
Yeah, who basically... The scholarly story on Erasmus in relation to Ficino is he reads the Latin translation of the Republic done by Ficino without having seen the Greek text, and decides basically that this is a brilliant translation of the text, despite saying that he's a philologist and he's interested in the underlying text. He hasn't seen the underlying text, but decides that the Latin translation is a brilliant translation of the text. Tells everyone, this is brilliant, this is exactly what the Republic is all about, Ficino is a genius, and so he's, as the Prince of the Humanists and the main opinion maker in the Academy, just basically leads to this form of the text being the adopted form of the text. So...
Starts building the walls,
and then, you can't question Erasmus. If you're the next guy in, you can't say, well, he was wrong about this. So everyone starts...
Just a minute, sir.
Exactly. So everyone just starts singing from the same hymn sheet about what the Republic said. Now, one of the really interesting features of the first book of the Republic, which is obviously like the particular area that I'm interested in here, the early speaker changes in the first book of the Republic. One of the interesting things about the first book of the Republic is that after you get kind of over this, in the versions we have today, this kind of opening preamble, the first substantive discussions in the text take place around money, right? The value of money, inheriting money. Now, who were Ficino's benefactors? They were the Medici. What was really a Medici agenda at the time that Marsilio Ficino is being employed by them to translate these texts? Well, it's obviously an agenda about money. It's an agenda that's very strongly anti the kind of church attitude to usury and the role of banking in society. So you see that there's a huge amount of pressure on Ficino, because what the Medici really want is to basically come up with a classical ground which they can oppose to the Christian, as it were,
10th
classical
century
ground.
corporate interest or something.
Exactly. To elevate the role of the banker above the role of the priest. And Ficino, as an ordained Catholic priest, seems to basically get into sort of bed with the Medici to accomplish this end. And I think, so you have this powerful coincidence that then he's the first guy who ever thinks the book reads like this. And all of a sudden the book is about money, right? And is sort of peddling much more mild attitudes towards money than you would find in the Bible. Like, basically money, okay, it's not the be-all and end-all, but it's good to have it. You'd rather have it than not have it. Sort of simple, everyday, why are we being so fussy about money? Like, it's not the, root of all evil. It's not, et cetera, et cetera. So, maybe we're being a bit harsh on the bankers. Effectively, says Plato, via Marsilio Ficino, and you get to... So you're situated in that history.
Damn.
And, I mean, look, I think to some extent, if you look at our culture today, you can see that, like, the bankers kind of occupy this very special place. Now, arguably, this connects to...
Well, certainly money does.
Money does.
Yeah.
And certainly this connects to, if you want to talk about a significant change between, like, what you would call, like, a sort of Christian society where money's filtering to the church, being distributed on a needs basis to, people in the community, to a, like, capitalist model where there's a few owners, effectively. I
mean, I love a good miracle of capitalism, It's
yes.
like all of the amazing stuff, but
yeah,
you could see how people maybe might strive to be good and true and beautiful, and, like, that's the important endeavour.
yes.
Not so much material wealth. And I think we all resonate with that. We're
yes.
like, yeah, that's kind of... I mean, hey, it's nice to have food and,
Yes,
be
of
able
course.
to clothe yourself, but
Yeah.
sort of barring a bit of that, what do you want? Adventure,
Yeah.
Like,
But also community. It's like a shift in your attitude to community fundamentally, right? Which is fascinating, because what is the Republic basically about? What is the concept of Republic? I mean, in Greek it's politeia is the term, right, from which we would translate Republic.
Scarily absurd how much that might have influenced or affected the world.
Yeah, because it's essentially the text that we have. It's still the most taught text in, for example, US universities about community, right? It's the text politeia. Essentially, we translate it in Latin as Republic, but in Greek you could just translate it as community. So what is the essence of our community? What is the most taught text today about what a community consists of? Is the Republic. And what is the first issue which the Republic thinks... Well, the first thing that Ficino wants to put in Socrates' mouth is
this even an ordering thing? Like,
is a discussion about...
which to...
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. There's a discussion about money. So, and its value. Sort of with this view to saying, well, maybe we shouldn't be so... Maybe we need to, get more respect for money, basically. Maybe it's not so bad. So, you put all these things together and it just starts to feel like seems like basically what we're doing as classical philologists is peddling ideology unsupported by philological evidence, right? More or less because of, incumbent power structures in the academy and this alliance that goes back to the Renaissance between inverted commas academics and money, right? Like, so
slight jargon is that philology is the study of the text sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So philology would encompass all those things, like looking at change of speaker marks, looking at the way that the text had changed over time.
Damn.
But so anyway, once I get this sort of
okay,
it's unthinkable response, I take that back to my supervisor, and he's like, "Oh shit, I don't know what you got to do about that." Like, that's not. He said, "Yes, I did notice he used that word." Like, so.
What a word.
Yeah. So then I was sort of like, well, what am I going to...
getting a tattoo of that word.
Yeah. Impossible. Inconceivable.
Here you stand, unthinkable.
Yeah. It's that, the Princess Bride, right?
Yeah,
Inconceivable.
Yeah.
So...
Keep using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means.
Yeah. Exactly. That's what I wanted to say back to him. I do not think that word means what you think it means, because you're thinking it right now, buddy. So,
you're trying not to.
Yeah, exactly.
This
thought keeps occurring to me that I cannot be having.
Thinking you on the terrifying edges, you know?
Exactly.
When you dream.
So then it's like, well, what to do? Like, you talk about...
Under the rug with that shit.
Exactly. You talk about Pink Floyd, right? You talk about The Wall. Here we are. We're just smacking into it, right? Like, So,
Jeez.
what to do? So, basically what I did was I sort of pivoted on it. I said, okay, well, like, I'll just present that evidence, right? I won't say the conclusion that appears to me to be the obvious one, that is to say our text is completely, bogus today. What I'll do instead is I'll say, like, okay, well, leaving all of this stuff aside, like, whether or not Ficino was a genius of the Greek language, and whether or not our grammar has come down correctly such that this would be an appropriate way to and whether or not we're right to dismiss all the Greek change of speaker punctuation but adopt this Latin one. Leaving all of this to one side, there is this very fundamental thing which you were noticing when we were talking about it earlier about the way that the Greek language is written, right? Like, why is the Greek language written in this continuous script? Okay, so one obvious thing is to
Drawing
say...
it upstairs on your desk.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. One obvious response is to say, well, the Greeks didn't have punctuation, right? They just didn't know about it. So, as we innovated, as we are innovative people, we suddenly realized, oh, holy shit, like, look at these tools. They help so much. Like, we used to just have... Exactly, we used to just have these kind of...
Thing.
Exactly, and now, oh, God, how are we supposed to put these together? Okay, we say the Greeks were incredibly intelligent people.
Idea, package.
Yeah.
Package, paragraph.
Exactly, paragraph, indent,
Essay.
numberings. Yeah, exactly. Okay, we say the Greeks were geniuses, but maybe they just never figured out a better way to write. Like, they were just, for whatever reason, they were just like technological Luddites when it came to writing. They're geniuses about how you structure a community, geniuses about et cetera, but just couldn't figure out how to write things down. Okay, we came along later and we're like, why don't you just put a space between the words, right? Like pretty fucking obvious. Okay, so textual innovation. That's one response, but this is the interesting thing. So I go, okay, well, like, let's interrogate that claim. Like, let's go have a look. Okay, well, what do you find if you go and look at archaic Greek inscriptions? That would be to say Greek inscriptions which predate the classical period, the oldest ones that we have. What do you notice about those inscriptions? Basically, what you notice about those inscriptions is that they contain a lot of punctuation. Okay, so here's a really weird thing, right?
Wow.
There was punctuation, and then you hit the classical age of Greek, all the punctuation goes away.
Damn.
It's not like they didn't know about punctuation. They deliberately didn't use it. Okay, so now we're talking about removing punctuation as a textual innovation. Right? Like, think about that as totally crazy different paradigm. Okay, who's talking about media theory today, right? Like, basically, fuck all people since... Well, there are people talking about media theory, but certainly not in respect of classical texts. And I think a lot of Marshall McLuhan's great work around this medium is the message, medium is the massage stuff, has been likewise swept under the carpet, right? But at the time he was talking about this, I mean, he was making a very good point, which is that you cannot separate the message of, for example, a text from the medium in which it is written, right? Like, media theory, and this is, I suppose, the point about the difference between archaic and classical inscriptions, is maybe media theory is not such a new thing, right? Maybe classical Greeks had quite an advanced media theory, basically, about how you should write a text. Because what is the message that you're trying to get across in a text? Right? What are you trying to do with a text? And you know, what is the goal here?
Sure, like how could you separate that?
Exactly.
Like you watch a film, it's like
it's a film.
you in the
right?
film, and you see the
Exactly.
film, and you're like, oh well, here's my meaning of the film. You're like, oh yeah,
Yes.
okay.
Yeah.
How do you
If it was a book, it would be totally different.
how do you abstract that out from the
filmic nature of it.
yeah
Yeah. And I think these are fairly, in a way, obvious points that Marshall McLuhan is making, but we just don't tend to think that way because we very much tend to think, well, the message of something is what's contained within it, and it is a more or less value neutral.
It's the like wrapper,
Exactly, it just wraps
or it's the pipe. you know?
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. It just wraps the message, and
Yeah.
it's a mode of delivery of the message, but it's not actually the message. It's totally distinct from it. You could drop that message into a different thing and deliver it, or drop it into that and deliver it.
It's like abstraction or something, or we're like
Yeah,
we carve the thing into its meaning or its message or whatever that is,
yes.
separate from
We keep them separate, and you just oh well, you know, this is a convenient way to deliver
films.
the message.
Like they come in packets, they're buckets, you know.
Yeah, and we can
Buckets with
just
thing in them.
put a message into the film and deliver it that way, or you could put it into a book and deliver it that way, or you can put it into speech and deliver it that way. These are just modes of delivery. But there is something more significant going on when one thinks about media theory, and you look at the history of ancient Greek writing, is to say that you see these changes which seem to reflect a very different way of thinking about media.
Sure.
As just vacuous vessels for messages.
And if like amazing greatness came after the changes, you know, it's like
Exactly.
good choice.
Exactly. It seems like they made a good
Yeah,
choice, because
yeah.
then all of a sudden a flourishing of their society takes off.
Sure.
Um,
Let's decide to only use the one word. You know, it's like, oh, that's probably not going to work out for you.
yeah.
Like 2 words. you
Yeah,
know?
exactly. I can't get anything done. So you've got this beautiful history that connects with modern media theory and implies that media theory is not perhaps as modern as we think. Pointing you in the direction of something very significant about the way in which you write and the way in which you read, right? Like, because if you think about, again, through the prism of politeia, through the prism of community, and I think I mentioned to you last night that there was that exchange in some film my dad was referring to where C.S. Lewis said to one of his students something about being a good student, and the student said something like, I love to read because my dad always told me we read to know that we're not alone. Okay, so you're talking about a text about community, politeia, right? You're talking about trying to break through people's sense of, as it were, aloneness to a sense of community with one another.
Wow.
You have a text that innovates a form, or belongs in a tradition of textual innovation around the medium of writing. To try, and this is the seminal work we still today. This seminal work we teach on community in university.
Lost that.
Yeah. And why has it been lost? Okay, well, here's why it's been lost when you think about it, is a desire to control textual interpretation, right? Because when you have a string of text like that...
It's the old enemy power.
Yeah, when you have a string of
Control.
text like that, you can chop it up lots of different ways, as you see if you study the manuscript tradition. You could say that bit belongs to this person speaking, or that word is actually split here, or look at this, look at this,
Sure. Postmodern critique.
I'm getting a sort of reading that I can relate to in this text, right?
It's a feature, not a bug.
Exactly, and then the view is it's a bug. We need to eliminate this bug because look at what's happening. You're saying the text is about this and that, and I'm saying the text is about this and that.
You live in the world, and
it's
you have
fracturing
your
our community.
and...
It's fracturing our community, right? Like this text about community and this textual innovation style is seeming to be destructive of community. Okay, but why is it destructive of community? Isn't it at the level? Isn't this the bizarre thing that it's at the level that one tries to take it, as it were, out of the written form and put it in an oral form, that one finds the fracturing of community occurs? Because that's when I say to you, well, this is what I say the text says, and you say to me, well, this is what I say the text says. Because when each of us just looks at the text, we just read the text the way we read the text, and we have our relationship with the text, right? Our relationship is between the author and the text. Both of us love that text. Because when both of us look at the text, we both go, yeah, absolutely, man. You look at it, you go, yeah, I feel that sense of community with the author, right? What fractures it then is when I say, oh, isn't that interesting how it's about so-and-so? So I switch it out of the medium of the written word and I try and put it in the medium of the spoken word. And I say to you, isn't it interesting that it says this? And you say back to me, well, that's not what it fucking says. It says this. Now, whoa, community is riven apart because you and I are arguing. Okay, so what's the solution? Solution is, dude comes in, says, nah. We need an official version of that. We need the authorized version of the text.
Let's all vote. Let's get together. Let's
exactly.
Decide what it means.
Well, screw voting. I'll just kill you.
Oh,
you know, like,
wow.
And so you have this history.
Because there's a compression. Like if you watch a film or something, you're like, you feel the film and it's like meaningful. And,
yes.
But then like, okay, you're going to try and put that into words.
And what happens if you say to the person next to you, I thought it was a beautiful exploration of his love for her.
It's a shit film.
and they say it's a shit film. Or he didn't love her, he loved her. Or whatever. You're like, oh shit, well, we're watching the same film. Like,
yeah, and you're sort of not.
And you're having an argument then about this film that both of you enjoyed, but now have to fight about who was right to enjoy it their way.
Because obviously the film's objective and only has what I saw in it.
Yeah, exactly, because truth is not subjective, kind of thing. So then you see, okay, but see, what is built into that message of the way that ancient Greek was written was precisely that respect for this particular medium that is writing, and the way in which one ought to do it if one is trying to create a meaningful relationship between the author and the reader. And therefore between all the readers and that text and that author, and therefore between all those readers and one another. Because
you get this in fiction.
Yeah.
Like even in English, okay, maybe it's not quite as...
yes.
But like you read a beautiful story and it's like...
Yeah.
I don't know, Ursula Le Guin or something like this.
Yeah.
Like that's...
Yeah.
That's a part of me now, you know, like that.
Yes. And I feel that. Like, I no longer... You know, if you were to meet Ursula Le Guin, you wouldn't need to say, I don't really know who you are. You'd be like, yeah, I know exactly who you are.
You'd meet her and you'd be like, yes.
You and I spoke to one another.
Yeah.
You spoke to me and I heard you. Like, so... And
you can reread that book as you get older or in different... And it changes.
Say, holy shit, maybe this, maybe that.
Yeah. Like I even reread Harry Potter recently. I was like, wow.
Yes.
This last book's all about death.
Yeah, is it really? Yeah, because again...
how much have I read this, you know? Like,
yeah, that's passed me right by.
Which is weird, you know? Because you think, oh, well, it's just words on paper and like...
I read them.
You looked at all of the words and but like, you have changed.
Yes.
So...
Yes.
Like... I don't know, like the meanings hit different or something.
Yeah. Or
that you see more in it than you did before.
Yes. Yeah. But it's yours and you have this personal relationship with it. And, you know, what I tried to write in my thesis was when you think about the way that ancient Greeks were writing in the classical period, it was like writing as a gesture of respect. Because when you think about when you write like that for a reader, there is this implicit trust that you place in the hands of the reader. where you say, I don't need to tell you where to break this sentence. I don't need to tell you where to break this word up. I don't need to tell you who's saying what when. I trust you to find in that text the thing that creates the connection between you and me, without me needing to whack you over the head with it.
Wow.
So it's this beautiful gesture of respect that we don't write like that for one another. We write like that now in a vernacular language. It's like, how freaking clear do I freaking need to be to you, you freaking idiot, before you understand what it is I am saying?
Like
in this.
that
I don't
anymore.
trust you to
Yeah.
understand this text. I'm going to give you dot points, bullet points. I'm going to use capital letters. If you really think about how much punctuation is in a sentence when you look at it, it is breathtaking. There's more punctuation often than there is letters, right? Like the amount of different things, case shifting, colons, commas, full stops, hyphens, textual layouts, all this kind of stuff that you're laying on top of what is essentially just a bunch of words is amazing. There's a comedian who...
That's an amazing way of looking. Damn.
Yeah. There's a comedian who basically reads books like with their punctuation, It's just hilarious. Yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Right.
Uh,
That's amazing. That reminds me of this thing where this lady was like, it's best not to look at the rectangles in the modern world.
Right.
Like, you get up off your rectangle in the morning and like take back your rectangle and walk through your rectangle to sit inside your rectangles and then, like look at your rectangle, and she's
I'm
like,
obsessed with
don't
rectangles.
look directly at the rectangle.
All you can
Wow.
see.
Don't
Yeah.
look directly at the punctuation.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just
All
there. It's just a
punctuation.
little old thing. But when you add up the
Wow.
numbers of interventions, especially when you think about a continuous script text, to break that down into what we would say
And people
is...
think in speech. People like live in speech.
Yeah.
A bit. Like I was thinking, I don't know, this
You
random
hear
thing
it in your
I
head,
wrote.
I guess.
Yeah. And we also see in speech.
Right, right.
Like some
Yeah.
painting thing I was trying to work, I haven't figured out, but it's like you're walking down the street and you're like car, tree, road.
Right.
Like
Yes. You name the object, kind of thing.
It's like you see the word of the thing.
Yes.
You don't even like look at the thing, kind of.
Yeah.
You like see your concept.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Like the words are just... Well, I think this gets at this kind of
And
thing.
like you have this stuff, this stuff, and it's like world.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
Picasso paints a face, and like, because it's like you've got your tiny little thing on the face here, and you've got like mostly head.
Yes.
But you look at someone, you're like, oh, they're all face.
Yeah.
It's like you draw a picture of someone's face, you're like, eye, nose,
Yeah.
mouth, and you're like, circle, yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Trying to draw is like looking at the shapes, and they're weird shapes,
Yeah.
Damn.
I've never really tried the representational drawing, I must say. Well, apart from, as you say, just being like, I. You know what I mean? Like, with the girls.
Damn, with the words, it's
But something about the words, and you think about that level of intervention that
it's
you're
like
talking
you're looking
about.
through to the word, or looking through into the world,
Yes.
past the...
Past the surface of it. Like, exactly. And you think about what do we think... I mean, what's the fascination with computer coding? Like, what's the fascination with that kind of creation of a virtual reality? Well, what underlies, what's running underneath that virtual reality that you're creating is some sort of code, right? Some sort of words, ultimately, that are generative of this
Ones and zeros.
things that you're looking at. The code, the language of kind of the code itself. And I think, like, in terms of how humans intervene on it, you know what I mean? Now, if you think about a language like Greek through that prism, you think, well, when you look through, as it were, to the code, like, you're kind of like looking at it, right? Like, instead of like how that code is manifesting as something which isn't actually code, you're looking at the code, and there's some experience of that direct looking, which sort of
Is alive.
yeah, and it like jumps over those barriers that you might have when you're looking at the surface level manifestations of something, but not looking at the actual thing that's generative of those surface level manifestations. There's some kind of problem interacting, because you're not quite interacting with the thing, you're interacting with its surface level manifestation, right? Like, you want to get under You want to get deeper. So I think Greek is kind of trying to speak to that urge to get deeper. And that it's in that deepness then we find that connection. Wow. So, and we find that connection to each other. And we find community.
That's
right?
so beautiful. Do you find that with these texts? Like,
oh yeah, I mean,
when
this
you
is
do
why...
get back to the...
Oh my God, like, I mean, the moments of joy in my life are those moments where you feel that direct connection. And
2,000 years.
Oh man, this is the crazy thing. You can be looking at something in Greek and you can think a thought, and you think, oh, I wonder if anyone's ever thought that thought before. And then you go and you look at the Little and Scott, the dictionary, and you find that exact thought is like captured in that dictionary. That's the exact words put together in the order you were just thinking of them. And where is it from? Some piece of papyri 2,500 years ago. And you think, holy shit, like, bang, we just had the same thought, that person there and me here. And I can know that it's the same thought. So I can feel this bang, like, you know, over thousands of years. That's culture, I think, you know, bang, you're just jumping over these things and feeling these connections. Community. Like, and so...
Communion.
Transcendence as well, in a sense, like jumping out of now. You know, transcending time, certainly.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. So this is what I tried to say in the thesis, was basically like, look, there's something to this particular form of medium. And the craziest thing about all of this is, even though no one would dispute the fact that the original text didn't look anything like Byzantine Greek, because Byzantine Greek is got accents, it's got word spacing, it's got case shifting, it's got you know, different kinds of interpuncts, and even though nobody in the world thinks that the original version of the Politeia was
and they were
written in that
quite
form,
the empire, weren't they, the Byzantines? Yeah.
quite the empire, maybe still are. So, like...
Build, make, do.
Yeah, and then you think, well, why, given that we don't think that that was the original form of the text, if we prepare an edition of the text, that is to say, a text which is as close, as it were, we think, to the original as we can produce, do we produce it in Byzantine Greek? Wouldn't the obvious thing to do, if this is the point I tried to make in my thesis, be to produce that in classical Greek? It's a classical Greek text. We don't think it was a Byzantine Greek text. We think the Byzantines intervened on it and, you know, inserted a bunch of things that weren't in the text into the text. A lot of those things, vast numbers of those things. But when we produce the text, we say, here's our edition of it, not a translation, an edition. This is the kind of text itself. We produce it in Byzantine Greek. Now that's insane, unless we think that and this is the kind of, I suppose, the sinister indictment of the Academy that I would make, unless we don't like that message from classical Greek. Unless we actually prefer this message, which is the message of what? Authoritarianism, control, top-down, iconoclasm, like, you know, silencing
in
debate.
another lens, like certainty, like
exactly,
togetherness,
guarantee of
solidity,
singing from the same hymn sheet,
knowing
you say what Plato says, I know that's what Plato says, like
happy conformity.
Exactly, the dream of
a place to stand,
orthodoxy. Orthodoxy.
Oh, we love it.
Straight thinking.
It's
great. And against that, in a classical Greek sense, you might have something like homenoia, like one-mindedness, you know, versus kind of one thought, like that we're going to kind of shove on you guys, and you're going to take that thought and you're going to think it too, versus a kind of like, let's just hands off a bit and let people, okay, we can't guarantee this, but if we take our hands off and let people do it for themselves, we get to a deeper sense of oneness, rather than just like, you know, the Byzantines, for example, they loved publishing these things that were just like lists of questions and answers, right? Like written questions and answers, like, what is God? Like, oh, here's the answer. Like, who is Jesus? Oh, here's the answer. Like, what do we say about, did Jesus...
This is the world.
Exactly. Oh, yes. Okay, thanks very much. Okay, got it. I've read the book. Like, anyone asks me one of these questions...
We know there's no point to look.
Exactly. Anyone asks me these questions, I got it. I'll just blur it out for you. So...
Jeez. That's us, though, like...
Yeah.
We love that shit.
Yeah. And what is this?
We want to build our Tower of Babel. We want to kind of have the perfect structure that, turn all of the world into order.
Yeah. And what is this? What is this thing that's driving us to behave in this way? It's like, in this way, I think it's fairly clearly something like fear, What happens if we don't control it? Like, what happens? Oh, God, like, you know what I mean? Then it's just chaos, and we're all going to end up knifing each other.
Yeah.
So we got to come in over the top, knowing that this terror awaits us if we don't.
Tale as old as time.
And for your own good, everybody, shut up and listen to me. Like,
how many people take the hand off the tiller,
Exactly. And I think, like we were talking about earlier, when you do take your hand off the tiller, that's incredibly confronting for people because there's an implicit challenge in that, right? So I'm prepared to do this.
Come in the world.
I'm not special. Like, I don't have some special gifts that you don't have. Yeah. I don't. It's not like
plenty stupid and foolish.
Exactly.
And dumb as the rest.
You ask me the questions, I'm going to tell you I don't know. The same way you don't know what's going to happen to me. Like,
come on in. The Lord is fine.
Yeah, so there's this implicit challenge, and that people don't like that. They don't like to have it put on them in that way. And but how many times can we cycle over this nonsense? How many times can we keep trying the Byzantine approach before we go, oh, you know what, this is actually pretty crap? Like, it's not producing the kind of community that we thought it was going to produce. Like, it's a community, if this is a community, it's a community riven with division. And very serious divisions between people on really hardcore issues that people will not back down from. So you call this a successful exercise in creating community through this kind of authoritarian top-down approach. I call it a failed. I call it just a historical demonstration of the failure of giving up on the real promise.
Giving up on people.
Giving up on people, not trusting people. And therefore needing
not
big government.
Yourself,
therefore needing big government, needing to ensure people say the right things, needing to make sure everyone behaves in the right ways, and we're going to keep cycling that until we realize like that this was not the way. That this dream of this kind of order has been had by many people many times in the past, and each time has imploded, right? Because it's not true. This is not true. This is not true community. It's it's an attempt to stick people who don't really share one mind together and hold them there, more or less against their will. It's a kind of prison, not a community. And the best that people can hope for then is to find some little subset community that they belong to in that broader community they don't belong to.
Your mates at school, what can you do?
Mates at school, what can you do?
Thing, at least we,
Or like these people sort of like
camaraderie
or these people seem to hold kind of more similar views to me than these people, so I'm in with these people. I don't like hold all the same views as these people, but like it's closer than those like roughly defined outlines of people.
Gotta pick your team.
You gotta pick your team. Even the whole thing, like why do we have built into it just opposition? You know what I mean? As though a community necessarily has to have an adversarial system of government at its core. That is how you function. You argue with each other. You know what I mean? Why would you build that into your system? Like, why wouldn't you just say, no, like, obviously consensus? You know what I mean?
Well, like, balancing is good. Like, I think you sort of have...
It might be better than total chaos, but it's not as good as sharing a common view, right?
Sure.
So it's only when you give up on the common view, you say, well, that's just fantasy
I'd
stuff.
take discourse over debate any day.
Yeah,
All
we'll
the
just
time.
say, oh, we're never
Yeah,
going to
yeah.
get to that.
But like, I don't know, debate is better than no debate or something.
Yeah, sure. It's better than just like maybe just...
Two is better than one.
2 is better than 1?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, like there... I mean, I suppose it depends on how you look at the one, because, I mean, one thing that I've thought about...
If it's like the totalitarian one, you know. Like,
Except what is the totalitarian... Like, what are we calling the totalitarian one there? Because I think there's a sense in which you can say it's also about, like... Kant wrote a bit about this, but it's also about, like, representation, isn't it? Because this one, if it's a representational one, right, and a person who's sincere about that representation, then at least that one is trying to represent all. You know what I mean? Whereas when you have 2, neither one of those claims to represent all, is even interested in representing all. Each is going to represent half, or roughly half. You know what I mean? So
quarter.
the one sounds terrible in a sense, because you just go boom, boom, dictator, like tell. But on the other hand, if that one is sincere,
The whole one.
if it's a whole one and that person is sincere, but obviously all of this is much inferior to a consensus model where you're just going, yeah, you and I both think the same way, and we are not opposed to one another at
Feels
all.
a little bit Quaker, to be honest, the thing you're proposing. You know, the Quakers used to have
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you feel moved or whatever.
4 hour kind of
Yeah.
village commons, everybody
Yeah.
says what they think.
Yeah. And then we agree on kind of the path forward.
We're all about those questions, you know? Not that into answers, but all about.
Yeah. But one thing, I think this is like what has been lost, and the reason that probably this is the thing that, from my perspective, the reason that we're putting all these things in the weird order that we are, is because we lost the tool that we had to foster real community. And that tool that we had was ancient Greek in its classical form, this unpunctuated text. That was what we had. That was our thing, you know? And that was why we look back at classical and go, oh, it's amazing. Look at this. I mean, some of the history people will get fired up about, but there's this sort of attraction to something that happened at that time in humanity.
Something magical happened there. That's
Something magical happened, and, you know, it's connected to... It is embodied, or whatever. It is realized in the form of the Greek written text. Until we get that back, we're just going to keep doing this, because it's our solution to this problem. And it's been around for a long time, but it's been through violent history. And
precious solution, holy shit.
yeah, it's this great treasure. Now, I submitted this to Cambridge University Press, this argument, and they said, well, what's the point of this argument? Why would we publish this book? What's the point? Like, that's actually the first question I say in the book that I submitted. It's like, why would we do this? And I then go on to propose some answers to this question. The response I got back from Cambridge University Press was, why would we do this? And I was like, well, did you read the first page? Or did you just get like some pressy of what the book was about and then go, it doesn't make any sense to me. So, you know what I mean? Like, there's some sort of, again, like you talk about the wall. I was talking about the wall. Like, bang. Like, you just run up to Cambridge Uni Press, bang. Nah, we're not going to talk about that. Like, you know what I mean? They're hell-bent, those bastards, at Christ College, at Magdalen, at whatever, you know, Christian religious organisation they're affiliated with.
I mean, this is the heretic's tale of all this time, you know? Martin Luther, Galileo, you know?
Yeah, I mean...
This sort of thing, you know? First go through the wall.
Yeah, well, it's just, I mean...
The institution doesn't have a bar of you.
Looking at it like, we're just like, you know...
We're over here and we've built our whole livelihoods on this, and we're doing this thing over here. I'm like...
And we're just, you know, you can go and...
This idiot with a pickaxe coming at the bedrock, you know? Like,
yeah, who cares about you?
Yeah, damn.
And, you know...
Tragedy.
Yeah, well, I mean...
And their loss as well, you know?
That's right, it's not like we go, oh, you know, you guys are having a terrific time there.
And owls.
eating your dinners.
You
like,
know?
yeah. Again, but I think like it's probably more. It's not so much about anything other than fear. It's that fear that like, well, if we lose control of Christ College or whatever, and that I literally eat my dinners there, well, where am I going to get my dinners from? You know what I mean? Like,
It's an important question.
I think I'm just going to say no to this. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, we'll just keep things the way they are. Actually,
Has anybody picked it up? Like, if, you know...
I mean, look, the people who passed it as a thesis were like, "This is great. We really love it.
Okay.
You should try and get it published." But there's a big difference in the academy between academics who might be like, "Yeah, this is cool," and whomever it filters up to ultimately. And this is one thing that you don't know because of anonymous peer review. There might only be 3 dudes who are making the decisions about all of these books. You know what I mean?
Damn.
So, unless you've got those 3 dudes on side, who cares what
Interesting.
you could have
like we
50,000 academics beneath going, "Oh, this is a terrific book, we love it." But if one of those guys is like, "I don't like it," well then, you know, this is not a democracy. In fact, it's a totally opaque. I mean, what system have we ever thought works well when there's no accountability? Like, what system have we ever thought is like a terrific... Oh, you know what makes the justice system work well is if you have anonymous judges. You know what makes a parliament work well? You just have anonymous parliamentarians.
Wow.
Faceless, grey people just, decision made. You know, terrific. That's the kind of... But that's the academy. We want to... That ensures that the academy functions smoothly.
Russell Cooper, you know. And
Oh, yeah.
He's been complaining about this from an economics perspective.
Oh, yeah.
Because he'll write some, you know,
Different
thing
take.
that's a bit out there, and he'll like kind of almost know who the reviewers are.
Yeah.
Because it's like small enough and niche enough.
Yeah.
Only a couple of people that.
Yeah. You said it to that guy, he's saying a big fat N-O. Like... And I've seen it happen, you know, so...
Reviewer number 2.
Yeah. I know. But you just like, isn't it all just built into the fact that the review is anonymous? Like, you can see that something sinister is going on there. Anonymity might be justified in circumstances where the person claiming the anonymity is somehow vulnerable.
Sure.
But we're talking here about...
witness in court.
Exactly. But here we're talking about the decision makers are claiming anonymity. Not the vulnerable underling people, but the top of the pile. The ones
Maybe
who
that's
decide.
almost what you need. You're like, oh shit, this thing could be from some reputable person. You know, like some...
I think they keep that stuff so
vulnerable-
close, they know. Like,
Okay.
you know, it's only going to be there. They know what they know what their friends specifically are writing about. You know, and so
What if
they're not
you-
going to be surprised. Oh,
like
maybe George wrote
poets
this.
and writers do that, you know, they just take on a pseudonym so they can do something.
Yeah, but I don't think it's... I mean, I worry less about the anonymity of the author. Like, I think, okay, like, possibly you could justify that. In the end, the author is willing to come out and
Sure.
write. Well, you know, I think...
Here I am.
Actually, Peter
I
Singer
wrote
started
this,
a journal where he's allowing people to publish under
Pseudonyms.
pseudonyms.
Interesting.
But, you know, ordinarily, like, you would just publish under your own name. So... I worry less about whether
Hard enough to get shtick, you know.
Yeah. Whether they're anonymous through the process seems to matter less, but the anonymity of the reviewers, I mean, that's deeply sinister.
Fascinating.
People will defend it though, so, but who knows who knows why.
All these things that you just never sort of question. That's how it is. That's how this
Yeah,
science machine works. You know?
that's how it works. Yeah.
Till it doesn't.
Well, and also you realize no one's been questioning. You can't find much explanation for it. It's not as though there's some rigorously articulated position on why anonymous peer review makes a ton of sense. In fact, there's a lot of research suggesting it doesn't make much sense.
Oh, well, here we are.
But
This is what we
somehow,
do. We
in
built
spite
that,
of that, exactly, there's just like this incumbency
Mm.
that mysteriously appeared and is now incumbent, and so therefore it must be okay. Like, it's about...
We just collect orthodoxy. We love it. You know?
Yeah, that's right. It doesn't
Love that
actually
stuff.
even matter if there's
You
an
just build an
explanation for it.
institution. Like, you have whole fields of science that are just fake, you know?
Right. That's pretty serious, yeah. People
They're all
wouldn't-
writing papers, and it's like everybody's wearing the clothing, you know?
Right.
But did any of you look at the world?
Yeah,
Along
yeah.
the way? Oh, well, no, well, with this new interpretation of this thing or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
As you would know with philosophy, you know, so it's like
Oh, well, I mean, philosophy. I mean,
take an
philosophy
axe
is
to
an
half of it, sort of thing.
insane discipline. Like, you know, again,
Mm.
I mean, at least with
If
say,
you
philology.
build a house, like the house falls down if you're a bad house builder. But like you can write papers for years. You can have
There you go.
ideas. You can,
Yeah, well, this is what attracted me to philology was at least you're working with like, you know, here, look, I'm, you know,
yeah.
there,
Yeah.
right? And then there's a thing, you know, like.
And if we're that
Philosophy-
bad at the real stuff, what
I know.
about like
This
this?
philosophy is like, here's what I think about the world, and someone could just be like, yeah, I don't think with that either. I don't actually know. And then another person's like, well, here's what I think. Oh, sure, great, sounds good. Like, I'm thinking, you're thinking. And we're all just like...
That's a good time, that's good dinner.
Exactly, yeah. I know you, so I like your thinking. But, yeah, I think philosophy, I mean, that's a whole other kettle of fish. Like, I don't think you would even try if you were genuinely thinking about things to write a philosophy paper. It would be pointless. It would be absolutely pointless. Like, you know, if you happen to be studying under one of the guys who's publishing in the field, yeah, okay, you probably know what he's talking about, and so you could write another paper that followed whatever that shtick was. But if you were trying to come in from the outside, just being like, oh, I've had some thoughts about the world. Who gives a shit? Let's try getting that published. But you might be right.
Wow.
I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying you're never going to get it across the line with anybody. They're not even going to bat an eyelid at it, you know, like, bat an eyelid at saying no to it, so they're not even going to read it, you know. They're just going to say no to it. Because they have the benefit of anonymous peer review, and they're certainly not going to have an, you know, engaging, enlightening dialogue with you about your ideas, like, so, philology has more hope.
Someone should make some money, yeah. There's some lady that did like physics and talks to crackpots. Yeah, some physicist that makes some money.
Right. You
Oh,
should
well, might be a
wrap it up.
good pace to wrap up.
Yeah. Thanks, man. That was quite long in the end.
Bloody hell, what a show.
I feel like partly it's just therapy for me. Just getting to talk about my experience to a willing listener. It's a pleasure, man. Thank you.